So what we're going to talk about today, I'm going to spend a few minutes at the beginning talking about how to prepare for the summit. Then I'm going to go through our 3 legislative asks for members of Congress, and then I'll get to Q&A. And just quickly, Connor Herbert, who's one of our 2 federal policy fellows, will be monitoring the chat and answering any questions that you can see, any questions that he can before we get to the end. So as you have questions as we're going through, please go ahead and put those into the chat. And also please keep yourself muted because we've got a big group today. All right. So before you get to the summit, I always say it's good to spend a couple of minutes doing a little bit of research, making sure you know who your member of Congress is, what their priorities are, thinking through how they may think about biking and walking. And we have some resources to help you do that. But if you want to know sort of what they're doing right now, looking at your local news or looking at their website can help. So if you don't know who, what your district is, if you go up right here, if you just Google find your representative and type in your zip code, it will tell you who it is. If you're wondering what their website is, for most of them, it's blumenauer.house.gov or cardin.senate.gov. It's, if they have a very common name like Johnson, there might be a couple of them, but if you Google them, it should come up. But we have created some resources to help you with that. So we created these cheat sheets. There's one for every district that will tell you a little bit about if they've supported our asks in the past, if they've co-sponsored any of the bills that we've done. Same with the senators. There's also in this file, there's a document there about how to use that information. Oh, I don't know why. There we go. Okay, and Connor, please make sure to admit people as they're coming in. Okay, so after the cheat sheets, there's also fact sheets. There's a file for the Senate fact sheets, and there's a file for the House fact sheets. And then finally, there's also this extra information for you, extra materials. So in here, we have copies of the legislative language of the 2 bills that we're working on. That top one, Blumenauer, is for the safety bill we'll be talking about. And then there's a couple of FAQs, frequently asked questions, on the e-bike ask. One is specific to e-bike battery safety, and that's from People for Bikes. That's in there. There's also a general FAQ about the e-bike act. You can look at that. And then what I have pictured here is just some additional information about bike ped safety and trucks. And what I would say about that is look it over. If you are from California and 20% of their large truck fatal crashes involve vulnerable road users, that might be something you want to use in that meeting. If you're from Alabama and it's only 6 or 7%, it may be less important. So that's why it's not in the packet. It's for you to look at and see if that seems like something that makes sense. And if you're wondering, where can I find the fact sheets, this background material, the cheat sheets? One is that you should have all gotten it in your email this morning. And so there's links there, but it will also be available in the Whova app throughout the summit. So, and to find it, you just go to the National Bike Summit on Whova, go to agenda on the left-hand side. Once you click on the agenda, you want to find the date. So you want to find Wednesday. And then when you're looking at the activities, it's here under Lobby Day. And if you click under Lobby Day, it will open that up. And you can see all of these resources here. There's a Lobby Day resource Google folder right there. And then inside that is where you can find access to all of these things. So now I'm going to turn and talk about the asks that we're going to be making in our congressional offices. There's 3 this year. One is requiring side guards on large trucks. The other is the Sarah Lankenkamp Safety Act, and the third is the E-Bike Act. So when we talk about truck safety, you know, it's something that at the League, we've been supportive of things like side guards and thought about truck safety, but it's always we've always focused on the bike infrastructure. Now that we're in between bills, this is a really good time for us to look at this. And I've been learning a ton. So for instance, these large trucks, they only make up 4% of the registered vehicles on our roads, but they make up 11% of bicyclist fatalities. And what's interesting is we know what that solution is. It's to put side guards on, like we see in this picture here. They can be called side guards. They can be called lateral protective devices. I'm going to use those interchangeably. But basically, there's something that goes on the side of the truck in between the 2 wheel axles that can both help a cyclist from getting sucked under the truck, but it can also help a cyclist from getting crushed by the back wheel of a turning truck. So there's 2 common types of crashes. The first is when a truck overtakes the cyclist, or sometimes is called a cyclist losing control. And I'm going to show some still images from about 6 seconds of a video of a truck overtaking a cyclist. I'm going to tell you at the beginning, the cyclist lives through this crash. So you can see here, this is the bicyclists in the lane. They're signaling they're going to move over. And what happens when that truck passes you is first there's the wind or the air that comes off of them that sort of destabilizes you, why they call it a cyclist losing control. It kind of pushes you out. But then right behind the cab of the truck, there is a low pressure area that almost acts like a vacuum and pulls you in. And in less than half a second between when the front bumper reached the cyclist until this point, you can see that bicyclist has moved half the distance from where they started towards the truck. That's that vacuum pulling them in. Here we see a probable contact with that rear axle of the cab. Now we see the bicyclist trying to steer away from the truck. And now they're hitting that secondary low pressure zone. So feeling that vacuum again. And this is 1.24 seconds. So not very long into this whole thing, we see them hit the truck. And what this blue is outlining here is the line of the rear wheel, and that's what you really need to avoid. And you can see he didn't avoid it completely, but was far enough to stay out of it. And we don't even know if the truck driver knew this was happening. This was a hit and run. But that was just a couple of seconds, and you can see why that can be so dangerous. What a side guard does is basically it creates that physical barrier that stops you from going underneath the truck. From the research that we've seen between side guards and bicyclists, we know that we want that side guard to be no higher than 13.8 inches from the ground. And that's important. That's different than the UN standard for side guards, because the UN side guard standard was written for vehicles, for cars. So cars don't underride a truck. The Volpe Center, which it's a US Department of Transportation research center. So they only do research, they don't do policy. They also ran some tests. These are some of their engineers. The video is more compelling, but they did this with bicyclists as well as pedestrians. And you can see the difference between when there's a side guard there and when there's not. The other common type of crash between a truck and a bicyclist or a truck and a vulnerable road user is when the truck is turning. And the danger, again, I mean, it's not just the impact, but it's getting out of the path of that rear wheel. And so this is a simulation of that. You can see the bicyclist is parallel to the truck turns, and the bicyclist both is impacted by the truck and falls underneath it, and then is in danger of getting crushed by those rear wheel. If you add that LPD or side guard, you can see it will push the person out of the way. You still crash, but you're going to live. And that's, of course, most important. So why do we want that testing with vulnerable road users and not just with cars? You know, as we were saying, for a car, we want to avoid the underride of a car, but the goal is to stop the car before the occupant living space is under the truck. And so that side guard, it needs to be super strong because it needs to stop a car at 40 miles an hour. And it's going to do that through contact of the hood and the grille. For a vulnerable road user, we don't necessarily need it to be as strong, but we need it to be lower so that it pushes you out of the way of that rear wheel. And the research shows that that is effective. Again, and I'll say most of my information on this is coming from the US DOT Volpe Center. They've done the most, they probably have the most expertise in this and have done the most conclusive research that I have found. So they looked through a number of studies, all the studies looking at side underride guards or LPDs and vulnerable road users. And using those studies and what they did at Volpe, they found that in side guard related crashes, these should reduce bicyclist fatalities by 55 to 75%, and they should reduce pedestrian fatalities by 20 to 27%. And there's also been field research because the United Kingdom has been requiring side guards on most trucks for a while. And so they did a study there where they looked at bike truck interactions on trucks with side guards and bike truck interactions with trucks that didn't have side guards. And they found that the side guards, they found a 61% decrease in cyclist fatalities in the overpassing scenario and a 20% decrease in the truck turning crashes. So when we're talking about truck safety, what do we want from a cyclist pedestrian perspective? What we really want is for trucks to be required to have these, right? But where we are in the status of federal policy is that the infrastructure bill, it requires research. It doesn't require the side guard yet, but it requires a precursor of research to do that. The problem is the research that was in the bill doesn't discuss vulnerable road users. So what we're asking at the summit is for Congress to direct NHTSA, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, that does the research to get to regulation, asking them to make sure they include vulnerable road users in the side guard research. So the ask, and it's a little bit of a mouthful, we're asking members to sign on to a Dear Colleague letter that would support report language directing NHTSA to include vulnerable road users in side guard research. Now, I'm going to explain to you what that means. So I'm going to explain the terms Dear Colleague letter and report language. This is for you to understand what's happening. You don't need to explain this in your meetings. The staff know this, they're used to it. So if our ask is for Congress members to sign a Dear Colleague letter requesting report language on the appropriations funding bills. So what report language is it's language that clarifies legislative language. So it gives more specifics on congressional intent. It gives more details, but it doesn't give new authority to the administration. So since the infrastructure bill already told them to do research, but was silent on VRU, this would be Congress saying, and by that, we meant test with vulnerable road users. Now, in terms of what weight report language has. I'll say it's not the same as actual legislative language, but they are a directive that goes from Congress to the administration. And especially, when it comes on an appropriations or a funding bill, it's kind of like giving someone a paycheck and saying, and we really hope you do this. So it does get taken seriously. Okay, and so what is a Dear Colleague letter? A Dear Colleague letter is basically a tactic that they use to get report language. It's a way that Congress members lobby each other. So one of the members, they write a Dear Colleague and say, Dear Colleague, please consider putting this report language into the appropriations bill. So the letter is coming from members of Congress and it's going to the members of Congress who run the Transportation Appropriations Committee. And the more people you can get to sign on to that, the more influence it will have. And so the authors send around an email to everyone in their chamber and say, hey, please sign on to this letter with us. We really want this to happen. And then they send the letter to the people that make the decisions, the senior Democrat and the senior Republican of that Appropriations Committee. So in the House, the lead sponsors are Representative Steve Cohen of Tennessee and Representative DeSaulnier of California. So if you are from either of those districts, please make sure to say thank you. Here's the trick. The sign-on date is March 30th, which is the day after our Hill Day, right? So Cohen and DeSaulnier have sent it. I've just emailed staffers who you'll be meeting with saying, hey, please, pay attention to this. This is what your folks are going to be asking you, and they're going to need an answer. So hopefully this will help get a bunch of people to sign on. In the Senate, we have a couple more days. And the lead sponsor in the Senate is Senator Kirsten Gillibrand from New York. And I will say, these members of Congress have they had a marker bill trying to get this into the infrastructure bill. At that point, the bill was led by both Kirsten Gillibrand and Marco Rubio from Florida. Rubio is on the Appropriations Committee, so he's not signing on to this because it's weird to write a letter to yourself, asking yourself to do something. But he has indicated, that he wants to look at this and, is definitely supportive of side guards in general. So we're hoping we can get his support on that. A couple of things that might come up in your meetings on side guards. One is the industry has been concerned about lowering it to that 13.8, that it will cause trucks to get stuck on railroad tracks or something, but we know that there are trucks that are that low to the ground. There are cars that are that low to the ground all the time. Hence that picture. Another concern is that by adding the side guard, you're taking away from the amount of cargo that a truck can carry. But the reality is the truck limit is 80,000 pounds. These side guards weigh 50 to 100 pounds. And that most trucks, even when they're full, aren't hitting that 80,000. So that shouldn't be too much of an issue. Another thing to think about with that is that when the side guards are covered, so if they have material over them, they also become very aerodynamic, and those trucks can save or be more fuel efficient that way. And then finally, another argument for this is that we're seeing cities around the country adopt these side guard requirements. And these are the cities that have adopted it, a requirement that matches the Volpe one that is good for vulnerable road users. And we just had Massachusetts pass what I think is the first state level law. So, we're very supportive of those. We want to see those happen, but it's a lot easier for the industry if there's just one national standard. And so that's an argument for it as well. All right, I am gonna I'm going to stop and just see if there's a couple of questions and clarifying questions. So
Gene Sedaris asks, would guards be required on logging trucks or other trucks to go off road? I expect that question for rural parts of Maine.
yeah, so it would cover, I don't feel comfortable answering definitively on different types of trucks, but it covers the single unit trucks. It would cover the tractor trailer trucks. It's less of an issue with things like buses or trucks that are lower to the ground.
Has the trucking industry given a position on this ask? Is asked by James Sy.
Yeah, they don't know about this report language yet. I will say the reason that the infrastructure bill required research and not a requirement was that the trucking industry made the point that they felt like there needed to be more research. So I don't think they're thrilled about it, but we are seeing a lot of private companies start to require it on their own.
Someone else asks, many side guards I see on the road look very flimsy as if they are for aerodynamics, not crash protection. Is that true? Although I feel like that was probably covered.
Yeah, so yeah, I would say those flaps, it depends if there's something behind them. So especially for cars, you do need a much bigger metal structure behind it. And this is one of the reasons to have a national regulation, right? So that what is on the majority of trucks works. Some trucks are just putting material there because of the aerodynamics.
Yeah, they have sort of flimsy struts to keep them vertical, but it wouldn't stop any car.
Yeah.
And then
All right.
Terry Lansville.
I'm going to do one more.
Yes. Just has a couple of questions about whether or not there would be a grandfather clause for age of trailers, whether or not we have a AAA letter of support or insurance industry support.
Okay, so we're starting now with the research. I don't have, I have not asked the industry for a letter of support on the research, but we do have about 12 groups that are signing on, including the Truck Safety Coalition and the Institute for Truck Safety and the National Safety Council. So there are groups signing on, and we will continue after the summit to continue to build support. So I'm going to move on to the next slide. But before I get there, I know I gave this presentation to staff and there was questions about, well, what about personal vehicles? This report language is just for commercial trucks, but I did want to highlight that there is a session at the summit about that blind zone, that area in front of large cars and SUVs. That's going to talk both about personal vehicles and commercial vehicles and some preliminary steps that we're seeing moving in that direction. And I'll kind of say a lot of that is still on commercial vehicles, but we know that what happens to commercial vehicles will make its way to personal ones. Okay. All right, so now I want to talk about the Sarah Devick Langenkamp Active Transportation Safety Act. It's a long name, but it's in honor of Sarah Langenkamp. Sarah was a US diplomat and a mother of two. She and her husband are both diplomats. They were stationed in Ukraine up until last spring when they were evacuated back to the DC area because of safety in Ukraine. They settled in Bethesda, Maryland. And then in August, when she was biking home from an open house at her elementary school, at her son's elementary school, she was struck and killed by a truck driver making a turn. Now, we wanted to name something after her, but the truck bill is, or the truck ask is not a bill. And so we also, in talking with her husband, Dan, And Representative Blumenauer and Representative Rankin decided to name this bill after her in the hope that it would, honor her life, her service, and help to reduce or hopefully end a tragic loss like this again in the future. So what this bill does on the big picture level, it's going to make it easier for states and local governments to fund biking and walking safety projects and to fund them at 100% of federal funds. It's not going to cost any new money, and it doesn't require state DOTs to do anything, but it gives them more flexibility when they want to do something. All right, so the specifics of it is, one, it's going to highlight the need to fill the gaps in active transportation networks. And it explicitly makes that eligible under the Highway Safety Improvement Program, so you can use highway safety dollars. It's going to give states the flexibility to use highway safety money to fund a project up to 100%, so with no local match. And it will also allow states to use highway safety dollars as a match for transportation alternatives projects. Now, you might be thinking, wait, I've been on webinars with you before, and you've told us that under the new bill, states can use HSIP or highway safety dollars as a match for transportation alternatives projects. And that is true. That is in the bill, but so technically it's in the bill, but there's a huge hurdle to making that work. And it's something that neither our congressional allies or we understood at the time. And so we want to clarify the congressional intent behind that. So if you haven't been on a webinar with me, I'll catch you up. So Transportation Alternatives is the program where like 50% of funding that goes to biking and walking comes from. And it was created under the idea to fund local government priorities. So local governments choose the project and they apply for funding for it. The Highway Safety Program, that goal is to reduce fatalities, but that comes from the state level and it sort of works its way down. And so under the bill, it does say that states could use safety dollars as a local match for these local priorities. But according to federal highways, the state would first have to identify every single project that would be eligible before you could use it. And that really creates this fundamental mismatch because, you've got the local governments coming with their priorities and the state coming down with their state priorities, and they don't always match. States generally focus outside of the urbanized areas. And so we want to make that match, make that work better. So this bill is going to change that because it would say that a state DOT has a flexibility to use those highway safety dollars, HSIP match, to fund local priorities. And they could identify those local priorities either if it's a safety project that is a TAP, a transportation alternatives application. And it would have to be a safety program, a safety project, like a bike lane or walkway or something like that. Or it could be a project that has been identified in a local safety plan. And so since we're really just trying to make the congressional intent meet the language, we're hoping we can get this into law as a technical fix. So it does just give a state more flexibility in how they do that. It doesn't require the state to go out and say it has to be one of these specific projects. It says, oh, that local government wants to do that. That's a good idea. Let's fund that. And I know, I think especially folks who work at the local level may say, oh, it's so hard to get the DOT to do anything. And I understand that, but I will say that we did see several state DOTs apply to use this funding and then weren't able to. And Louisiana was one of those states. They found a workaround. They're going to talk about that at the National Bike Summit, about how to help local governments fund those transportation alternatives projects. But I also wanted to bring up this example of the Kansas DOT. So in Kansas, the DOT has been working on safety, and they've found that from their research that 70% of all the fatalities and serious injuries are happening on local roads. And as the state DOT, they've been a bit hampered in funding those. That's like, oh, it's easier if it's in a local plan kind of thing. So what they did is that when the US DOT, the federal government, came out with the Safe Streets for All grants, the Kansas DOT said to all the local governments in Kansas, if you want to apply to do a local safety plan, we're going to help you meet that match. And it worked really well. They paid 50% or more of the local match for all the communities. They got 12 projects, 12 safety plans funded. So they put in $1 million, they're getting to leverage 5 million out of the federal government. And that now, if we were to get this bill passed, the Active Transportation Safety Act, those safety projects identified in those local plans would now be eligible for highway safety funds in general, but also eligible to fund them up to 100%. And so that's great for Kansas, for all those communities. But I just want to remind you that under just 1 year of that Safe Streets for All funding, there were 437 planning grants funded. So if we were to get this language in there, all those projects could be funded with highway safety funding. And if a local government applied for it with a TAP program, it could be applied by 100%. Actually, they could all be funded at 100%. And that could make a huge difference when we're talking about biking and walking safety. All right, I'm going to go through this final ask, and then I'll stop for more Q&A. So the final one, I think this is, for a lot of people, this is a crowd pleaser. It's the E-Bike Act, or the Electric Bicycle Incentive Kickstart for the Environment Act. And it would create a 30% tax rebate on the purchase of an e-bike, with the top rebate being $1,500. A couple of the specifics on who qualifies, because it is a tax rebate and we wanted everyone to qualify, it is fully refundable. So even if you are a person who doesn't have to file federal taxes, you could still get the rebate on your e-bike. And that's possible two ways. You could file for the rebate, or there's a provision in the bill that allows retailers to give you that discount right on the spot. There is an income cap on who qualifies for this. It's at $150,000 for a single filer, $225,000 for someone who's, or yeah, $225,000 for someone who's a head of household, or $300,000 for joint filers. Now, this was a big deal last year, or in the last Congress. The original E-Bike Act did not have an income cap. But then when Congress was deciding whether to include it in the Build Back Better bill, they put an income cap at $75,000 for a single person. So we wanted to go above that. But we also know that Congress has a real interest in limiting that. They limited it for electric car vouchers. They want to limit it for this. And so the authors put a limit of 150. So that's 75,000 higher than the cap from the Build Back Better, but 75,000 lower than the cap for an electric car. And so when you think about a $5,000 e-bike versus a $55,000 sedan, that was some of the thinking, to be proactive, make sure more people could take advantage of it, but that Congress in general, we wanted to get rid of that concern. A couple more specifics. One of the things, when I talked about this at the last webinar, got a lot of questions about battery fires. This bill includes language that limits eligible e-bikes to ones with tested battery systems. And in that background information piece file, there's a whole fact sheet just on e-bike batteries. The bill also requires that the e-bike be in that class 1, 2, or 3. And by both of those, the the expectation is that it will reduce the number of low quality batteries that we've seen cause the fires. And a lot of those, I will say, have been from scooters, not necessarily e-bikes. So one of the things that Congress is concerned about is fraud. And so the bill prevents that by, there's a vehicle identification number that the manufacturers put on each bike, and who's ever getting the refund will need that. So if you're getting that refund at the point of sale, then it's up to the retailer to find it. If you are if you're doing it on your end of the year taxes, you will need that. But it's not like a registration or anything like that. There is a limit on the cost on how much an e-bike can cost if you're using this benefit, and that's set at $8,000. And that's, you know, much higher than the average e-bike, but that idea is to get so that cargo bikes could qualify, so that if the goal of the e-bike rebate is to reduce emissions and to reduce single occupancy vehicle travel or other vehicle travel, having a cargo bike makes that more possible. However, even if your bike costs $8,000, the highest rebate you can get is for $1,500. In terms of other limits, you can only use this once every 3 years. As one person, a married couple could do 2. And that they're only for personal use. If you're buying an e-bike for your business, you're going to have to write it off as a business expense. You can't both write it off as a business expense and on your taxes. And then finally, I know there's also been an issue that's come up about people riding e-bikes unsafely, and the concern of, you know, people who aren't used to going 20 miles an hour now being on an e-bike. There's nothing in the bill on that. But I will say that the League of American Bicyclists is working with People for Bikes to expand our cycling education about how to safely ride an e-bike. So we're working on that curriculum. There'll be videos, and we will be pushing that out. Okay. And there was also the question about, well, what happens if we have a local rebate or our state passes a rebate? Right now, there's nothing in the federal bill that would stop you from using both. And so they would be same way you might get a write-off that you use on your federal taxes and you also use on your state taxes. These two things could be stackable or work together. It's possible that a state or a local government will choose to write something different into their law. But right now, the way it's designed, it is for that to be stackable. And, you know, I talked about the benefits, and the main reason before this is to reduce vehicle miles traveled, to help reduce emissions. We have a lot of that data on the fact sheets. But I also know that folks have been really interested, and we've seen a lot of success at the state and local level for rebates. And I wanted to point out another summit session that will talk about the Denver e-bike rebate, and you know, with the eye of knowing that other locals and state groups are doing that. And I would not stop your state and local advocacy thinking the federal piece is going to come through. We hope it comes through, but the state and local might work faster than the federal. All right, and then I just wanted to add a couple of other resources. You know, we showed the cheat sheets. I talked a lot about what's in there and how to use it in the Lobby 101 webinar. There's a link here, and Connor will put it in the trash, in the, excuse me, in the chat. And then if you want to know more about truck bike crashes and mitigating the damage, we also did a webinar on that, and we had the expert from the USDOT Volpe Center on there, Alex Epstein, and so you can learn more details and more facts there. And with that, I'll turn it to questions.
Okay, so let's see. Jenna Thomas asked for clarity whether or not the Sarah Langenkamp bill was a House and Senate ask.
Great question. Right now, it is just in the House. We're still, our hope is to have it in the Senate. But we're still working on the details of that. So for this, it's just in the House.
Steve Arnold wanted to know, is a technical fix easier than a bill?
It should be. The reason I say that is because the transportation bill happens every 5 to 6 years. And we just did one in 2021, but a technical fix could happen at any time. And there are some drafting errors in the infrastructure bill that we'd like to get changed. And so we'd like to see if we can get this in as that technical fix, drafting errors, things like that.
Terry Lanzo asks, does the plan have to be of a certain age, like a plan approved before 2017, presumably in reference to
under
the
the Lankenkamp bill? No, it doesn't say that. It's yeah, it says a safety bill, and it would have to be a safety plan that lists specific projects.
Tim Blagden asks, when do we anticipate the SDO active transportation safety bill being passed? In New Hampshire, we may only be able to use it through September 30th.
Well, I don't see it passing that quickly, but we're hopeful, so we're going to work on it. And Tim, you'll have to email me about that deadline. That sounds like a very New Hampshire specific issue.
There was a 15% fatality issue.
Oh, well, yeah. This would allow, so what Tim is talking about is that there's over 30 states right now that have to use 15% of their safety dollars on just biking and walking or vulnerable road user fixes. And that's because 15% or more of their fatalities were bicyclists and pedestrians. What I would say, Tim, is that money never expires and still can only be used for bike ped. So if this, so even if you don't qualify the next year, if they haven't used their money yet, they can't use it for anything else. And this bill will help with that.
Steve Arnold asks, is this the VIN, or is this VIN the same as the current serial number?
Yeah, I got that question today. My guess is yes. And my guess is that they're calling it a VIN to match a car number so that Congress, who's used to talking about VINs in terms of cars, would understand what they're talking about. But I can double check on that.
Robin Stallings from Bike Texas asks, what is the ETA on the e-bike safety curriculum?
I don't know. That's a great question for Allison Dewey, who's our education director. It was just announced last week. We're just getting started.
Tomlin asks, how would it work for a retailer to give a discount at the point of service based on a person's tax credit status?
Right. So if you're a bike shop owner, how do you know how much that person makes? The person who is claiming the consumer, the customer would have to sign something that says, I agree that all these things are true, like that this is my only e-bike in the last 3 years, that I make this, I qualify for the income cap, etc. They do it with electric cars now and have done it in the past.
Phil Hoagie asks, does the e-bike rebate cover used e-bikes?
Not at this time. And
Susan
again, I
Grasso.
think that's a fraud issue for right now.
Susan Grasso asks, where can we find that list of 30 states?
I will send a map of that when we send the follow-up information. But I think it's also under our website under federal policy and federal funding resources.
Stephen Bingham asks, can you clarify the difference between lateral protection devices and LPD plus and need for VRU community to support side guards which protect against car underrides?
Yeah. So a lateral protection device or a side guard is, the idea behind that is what we need as a VRU. An LPD plus would make sure it also meets the standards for a car crash. And like I said, the two are not identical, but they are compatible. And oh, in terms of, yeah, absolutely, right? We want to support the safety of people in cars as well as vulnerable road users. We're a much stronger coalition working together. And so just like we have Families for Safe Streets, there is a group called Team Underride, which are all families that have lost someone to an underride crash. Most of those victims were in a car.
I think I missed a couple questions. Sylvia Onfu asks, why are the cities passing a law for side guards? Or pedestrian cyclist safety, other?
Yeah, it's a lot of it is vulnerable road user safety. In New York, over 30% of their bicyclist fatalities are crashes with large trucks. In San Francisco, it's 17%. And that was something that was interesting to me. I thought it would, we would see higher rural concerns, but it's a big concern in cities, especially where the truck route matches bicycle networks. So we don't see that as much in DC, but in a lot of those cities, it's a big problem.
And then Alan Mushnick asks, would the e-bike rebate cover replacement batteries and bike accessories?
I don't believe so. I think this is the first step in, and so we're talking about the whole bike.
And I think that's questions.
All right. I'd say if there are any other questions, maybe raise your hand digitally. There we go. And then we can go from there. So Ted?
That dear colleague letter, is that something that's been written, is circulated? Is it anything that we can get a hold of to hand out or show them?
Yes, it is in the packets. And I believe it's in the folder, the digital folders that I sent. I sent it to the state coordinators. I may not have sent it to everybody, but if not, we'll get it in there. I'll also say for folks coming in person, we also included a quick guide, one of the old quick guides that doesn't actually include e-bikes. But I know lots of times when you go into congressional offices and you talk about infrastructure and you talk about the need of safety, they want to talk about bicyclist safety. And so that's just a way to be like, yeah, of course we talk to bicyclists about safety and we teach safety, and like, here's an example of how we do it. But we need both things, right? We need bicyclists to bike safety, and we need the infrastructure. One of the things that Federal Highways talks about now, and a lot of the transportation engineering community talks about, is developing a safe systems approach, which takes a perspective that people make mistakes. So we need to build our road systems, we need to build our vehicles, and we need to build our education systems around the idea that people are going to make mistakes. And that's why we need all three. We need redundancies in the system.
And one question I missed, I believe Kai Plaskin asked at the beginning whether or not you would be, or we would be printing the cheat sheets for Bobby, if you like.
Yeah,
attendees.
we are not printing the cheat sheets. Those are not to be left in offices, but also, we're hoping you'll do a little bit of research ahead of time. They will be available on the Whova app or through the Whova app if you want to look at them when you're at the summit. In terms of the sort of additional materials, we'll have some copies of the FAQs on the e-bike and the e-bike batteries, and we'll have some copies of the truck safety piece. But the other things are mostly the legislative language. I'm not going to do copies of that.
James Side now asks, are there any one-pagers to leave behind?
There are. And if you're coming in person, we are going to have the physical folders like we used to pre-COVID. If you are doing a virtual meeting, we sent you an email this morning with links to all of the leave behinds. There will also be our links in the Whova app for those. And we would ask that you email those to the staffers ahead of the meeting. So for virtual meetings, we're asking the state coordinators to email those to the offices ahead of time. Yeah. And I'll say when I'm doing a meeting, I hold the folder and I give them one fact sheet at a time as I'm talking about it so that they stay focused on what I'm talking about. Kai?
Hi there. Sorry, I didn't catch that. What is it that you wanted us to email ahead of time?
So for virtual meetings, you should email the staffer the fact sheets that are in, there's one folder that says Senate fact sheets, and there's another one that says House fact sheets.
Okay, all our meetings are in person, so,
we've printed those out for you.
Okay, excellent. Oh, so you will have those printed, the fact sheets, just not these other things, other materials, right?
Yes.
Okay, and when will we get those?
You will get them when you sign in at the summit. The state coordinators will get the packet when they sign in at the summit. Let me rephrase that. Yeah.
Thank you. So if all these things happen, are you going to email us and go like, yay, everything happened and thank you?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll say last year we asked for funding for 2 programs and one of the programs got funded. So that was great. That was the Active Transportation Infrastructure Investment Program. And for the 2 or 3 years before the infrastructure bill, we had 3 or 4 asks that we did on transportation alternatives, on safety, on planning, and everything we asked for in those 2 or 3 years before got incorporated into the infrastructure bill. So we have had a lot of luck, and it is super helpful for me, for all of you guys to have these meetings either here or virtually. You can cover more offices in a day than I could cover in a much, much longer time. And so, 2 things happen. One, I'll read your reports that you send me after your meetings, and then I'll follow up and hopefully gain support that way. And sometimes the offices will contact me after having met with you and said, hey, somebody was in my office talking about this. Would love to know more. So it's super helpful, and we have a pretty good track record. You know what? So if there's no more questions, folks should feel free to jump off. I will stay on for another few minutes if you want to stay and ask another question. But thank you so much. You have my email if there's questions. I will be doing this presentation again Sunday night at the summit. It will be a hybrid, so I'll be giving it at the summit location, but it will also be on Zoom for folks that want to hear it again, or if someone missed it. And I just want to give, we'll say this again at the summit, but if you are coming in person, the buildings are open, but it is very, very hard to get your luggage through. So if you check out of the hotel in the morning on Hill Day, please leave your bags at the hotel and then circle back there to get them for your flight home. It's gonna be, we do have the church again for folks to hang out and have breakfast and lunch and all that. But we have to leave the church at a certain time, and you're not gonna be able to bring those bags into your Hill meetings.
I'm sorry, I haven't looked really thoroughly at the app and the meeting stuff, but I think we've got 4 or 5 people showing up in person, and I'm wondering if there's a time that we are meeting as a little delegation ahead of time, or if that's kind of up to us to try and coordinate.
Yeah, so Tuesday at 5 o'clock, we'll have our final plenary. I have someone from the American Enterprise Institute who's going to talk about how to promote biking and walking as a conservative and to conservatives. And then after that, there'll be an hour for you to break into your state meetings to go over final logistics for your lobby meetings. Andy, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I just want to ask briefly because I came in late. Is this presentation either recorded or available in PowerPoints? I know you guys sent 3 or 4 emails in the last couple of days, and I just hadn't had a chance to look through them.
Yeah, this will be available and we'll be sending it out.
Thank you.
Tom?
Hi there, Karen. I've got a little more question about how retailers work with the e-bike credit on person. If a retailer is giving the discount, the 30% discount at the point of sale, how do they then become whole? How do they get reimbursed for that?
They will then fill out on their taxes asking for the rebates. It's
It'll become part of their tax transaction with the federal government.
yes. And
Supply
there's
those
something
VINs and mhm.
exactly, and there's something in the bill where they can do it quarterly so that they're not sort of carrying all that debt.
Aha, okay, that's good. Great, thanks.
Sure. Tim?
So I was asking if I'm to be running hybrid meetings, will I have a difficult time getting my laptop through security? And once I'm inside of Hart, Rayburn, and Canon, are there reliable public Wi-Fi's to link to, or should I anticipate having a hard time?
So we really suggest either doing them in person or virtual. Hybrid meetings can be difficult. You will be able to get your laptop in. The House has public Wi-Fi. The Senate has it, but they change their password like once a week. And so it's hard to get on in the Senate. And that's why we were advising either do them virtually or in person.
Thank you. We'll figure it out during the state meeting the night before.
Yeah.
So we've got confirmation on all of our in-person meetings, and I'm just kind of wondering, does it take like 5 minutes to walk between all of these offices? How much time should we be giving ourselves to get there 15 minutes early?
I would say if you're going from a house to house or Senate to Senate, it's probably going to take you 10 minutes. Going from House to Senate or Senate to House it's going to probably take 20 minutes. But I think if you're 5 minutes early, that's fine. You don't really need to be a full 15 minutes early.
Okay, and then it looks like we've got about an hour, not between meetings, but we've got meetings at 10 and then at 11 and then at 12 and then at 1. And these meetings are an entire hour, right?
No, the meetings are usually going to be half an hour. It's good to have that, you know, if you have that extra time, that's definitely helpful. If you, and there's also, now that the buildings are open, you can go to the cafeteria and just hang out there. You don't have to buy anything. You can just sit. You can fill out your lobby reports for me. You can write your thank you email, and then go to your next one. Slightly off the hill, we have some rooms in a church where you can either, it's the same setup as last year. So there's a bunch of rooms downstairs if you need to take a virtual meeting. And then we have the upstairs room if you just want to hang out and have some breakfast or talk to folks. And we'll definitely, staff will be floating around. I might be there. I might be in some meetings or yeah, going back and forth. Terry?
Yeah, hey, with the comment about the church, is that safe to leave stuff so we can go into the buildings as lean as possible, or is that not a secure space?
It's, I'm going to say that the league is not going to take responsibility, but that I think it'll be pretty safe. It will be Bike Summit folks. The church is going to close at some point, probably around 4:30. And so if you want to come to the reception, that's 5 to 7, that will be after that. If you want to come to the briefing, we're going to do a briefing on truck safety for congressional staffers and for all of you. That's going to be 3 to 4. And so you're not going to be able to bring your bags into that. So it's really much better if you can leave them at the hotel or wherever you're staying. And there's also sources that we'll put in one of the emails where they actually pick up your bags. It might have been in the last email through Hoover.
Karen, can you hear me?
Yes.
I totally missed this whole thing because of work. And so are you going to put this, whatever you just went through for the last hour somewhere?
Yes. We'll have it online and we'll make it available. And I'm also giving it again Sunday night from 6 to 7. Both, it'll be a hybrid event.
Yeah, that's when I have to do my thing.
Okay, we will get you a copy.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. Thank you.
All right, last call for questions. All right, thanks everyone for registering to lobby. If really appreciate you coming to DC, really appreciate the help, and look forward to hearing how your meetings go.